Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. I'm Yas Rana and with me today are Joe Harman and Phil Walker. It's a slightly different episode this week. First up, a chat with Sam Billings and Joe Denly with just over a week to go until the start of the County Championship season. They talk about how winters have changed for county players over the years and how players attempt to grapple with all the opportunities they have in front of them. Sam was particularly interesting on some of the decisions he's made this winter, choosing to play in the Pakistan Super League over England's tour of Bangladesh and then playing in the County Championship over the IPL. Anyway, here is that chat with Billings and Denly. Hello and welcome to a special bonus chat for the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. On the last week's show, we promised a chat with two former KKR boys. So here I am at Kent with Sam Billings and Joe Denly at the start of the season. First of all, Sam, have you had time to process that mad PSL final?
Just about, I think. I got back at the beginning of the week and, amazing experience to be a part of the whole competition as a whole. But, that final, what a great advert for T20 cricket, but also the PSL. And probably should have been a little bit more comfortable than it ended up being. But, like I said, what a game of cricket.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've always had a reputation for being energetic behind the stumps, but I think you broke all sort of decibel records during that game. Yeah.
Did I? I was trying to calm people down. I was one of the quiet ones in our team, anyway. So,
got to ask about Shaheen's reinvention as one of the best all-rounders in the world. Strolls out, scores a 15-ball 44 in the final. Like, how did that happen, and what were people's reaction when he first said, "No, what guys, I want to bat 6"?
I'm going to sound really bad here and try and take a little bit of credit, but I got out. I was in the dressing room and he started kind of getting his pads on. The left arm spinner was on and they were going to start bowling. We'd lost, I think, 3 wickets to spin. And generally, obviously, we talk about matchups now. And in my head, I said to him, well, why don't you go out, try and slog this left arm spinner, left-hand bat?
So this is the first time it happened or in the final?
In the final.
Yeah.
And he's like, frantically got his pads on or whatever, and then the wicket went down, and he just marched out. David Wiese was very disappointed, and said straight out. But then he ended up just kind of blocking and getting off strike. Yeah. So my thinking was slightly different, and then he just took down everyone who bowled to him after a couple of balls. So incredible batting, and really changed the game. If we're honest, probably the difference in the whole game.
Yeah. Joe, it's nearly 20 years since your first full season at Kent. I looked on your Cricket Info profile today. April 2004 was when it all began. How much has pre-season changed over the course of 20 years?
Cool. You're testing my memory there. I don't think in terms of your planning and everything like that is still very similar. The times in which we're playing are obviously a bit different. Pre-season, April the 2nd, I think you said there. Our pre-season started a few weeks ago now, and our first Champo game's on the 6th of April. So, obviously, to allow us to get the amount of cricket we've got in our schedule at the minute, timings have to change. But not too different in terms of preparation and stuff like that. You obviously want to get outdoors as much as you can. If you have the budget, you try and get away and play some cricket because you know what the weather can be like in sort of March, April time. But in terms of how you prepare, I don't think it's too different.
I guess more with just people being all over the world. Like as a senior player and as a captain, how hard is it keeping track? Are you keeping track with people? Like, do you know that Fred Clarkson's playing an ODI yesterday, for example? Like, do you have a WhatsApp group keeping track of how everyone's going? What's it like, kind of keeping in touch over the winter?
Yeah, we have our WhatsApp groups, and we try and stay in touch as much as we can, and follow the lads wherever they are in the world. As we know, there's so many different competitions going on in the winter, and we've got some quality players that go and play in those competitions, and I think it's a credit to the county that we do have so many players participating in these competitions. We always try and stay in touch, and like you say, Freddie's away playing for his beloved Netherlands, which he loves to do. But I'm sure he's looking forward to getting back with us, and hopefully, you never know, bowling with a Red Dukes ball as well.
How much do you talk to young players about the opportunities? Because that's something that's obviously changed quite a lot, and it can change quite quickly for a player. A player can have one really good blast season, and then suddenly so many opportunities that didn't previously exist present themselves. Is that something you actively try and talk to the players about?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time with Jordan Cox over the last month or so, and he's the perfect example for that. I suppose at 22 years old, the world at his feet, really. And it's combining the fact, you've got to have an incredible work ethic and consistency in terms of playing cricket, but there also has to be a balance to it as well. I was probably a bit of a guinea pig, I suppose, at the start of it, in terms of I've learned a lot that I've done too much without playing too much cricket and trying to go to too many things. And that's the challenge, actually, is overdoing it as much as not doing anything at all. So it's amazing, the opportunities as a young player now. It really is incredible. You don't actually have to play for England to travel the world anymore. That used to be the case. That was the real main way of travelling, I suppose. Incredible time to be a young cricketer.
Sorry, I'll just to go back to your first question about the schedule and everything like that. I think that's probably one of the biggest differences. Sort of back when I started, during the winters, you'd probably find another line of work or go and enroll in some sort of education somewhere else, or go overseas and play grade cricket in Australia, for example. I did that for a few times, but the opportunity now with all these competitions, preparation, I suppose, in that sense is a lot different. We have guys scattered all over the world playing in these franchise leagues. It's not all about focus on red ball cricket in pre-season. And like Sam touched on there, you have to be wary as well of guys coming back that have played a lot of cricket, that potentially don't need to train outdoors, for example, and hit the amount of balls that some guys would need to, that have been stuck around indoors all winter. So I suppose it's a balancing act, as Sam touched on as well, about where players have been and what they've been playing.
At one point, sorry to interject, but at one point we had two people here for 2 months. So one guy was rehabbing, the other one didn't want to go away. So everyone else was playing cricket at one point, either in Dubai or South Africa, all over the place. Grade cricket in Australia. So it's amazing, really. Out of a 23-man squad, only two people were here. So it's changed dramatically, and it's great. The value you even get as a young player, the best thing I ever did was go to Penrith and play our winter, a full year of grade cricket in Sydney. And that kind of, in terms of my development, not only as a cricketer but also as a bloke, you had to grow up overnight, fending for yourself in Australia. And it's brilliant. It's not just the franchise stuff. You get value out of kind of all cricket.
I guess with all those decisions, you don't know what's going to happen when you take one. So you get a contract. You don't know if you're going to play. You don't know after. You don't know that if I play this, then I might not play more of this. Butch was saying on last week's pod that people probably don't appreciate how hard it is for players nowadays when you've got all these opportunities. Do you think that's fair enough?
Hard in what way?
Because you've also got short careers. So from a financial point of view, you want to take the opportunities. You don't know what happens if you say no to an opportunity potentially as well. Like, does that mean you won't get asked again? Like, is that? I mean, you said you didn't want to go to the IPL this year to focus on
Bangladesh.
Yeah. So what was that? What was going through your mind when you're making those decisions?
Yeah, quite a bit to unpick there. So it really has changed dramatically. I think for a period of probably 8 years, I was England's best paid water boy probably, and played sporadically throughout that period and missed out on various opportunities. And I felt the best opportunity to play consistent cricket was to go to the Pakistan Super League instead of going to Bangladesh. That's a great example of where the game's changed. You don't have to play for England as a fringe player now. You can go to a top quality tournament, one of the best in the world, and play every game. So financially, you're better off in that way as well. And it's not all about that, but it certainly does come into the reckoning and the thinking now. So because I think it's all about fair value. Everyone, you're not going to get paid what Harry Brook does or Ben Stokes, but getting paid fair value and what that represents in terms of those contracts, is great for the modern day cricketer. From a mental point of view, it's tough not playing. Like it really does wear you down, and Joe's experienced it as well. We're paid to play cricket. We want to play cricket. We're competitive beings, and whenever you're not doing that and you're in the nets the whole time, you're working your nuts off to try and get in the team, it can be really mentally tough at times. So, yeah, it's not always, it looks great, obviously, on Instagram, where you're playing all these, or you're a part of all these different franchises and you're getting paid well. But actually, in terms of value and fulfillment, there has to be an element to that for each individual, and what you get, what that represents is completely individual. For me, playing for Kent is always fulfilling, and Test cricket was the biggest fulfilling experience I've experienced. So it's just managing all of these different things, and you've got to have really good people. So I'm going to keep on blabbering on, but having really good people around young players now is so important. Not just guys who tell you how great you are when you've had one good knock. It's balancing your schedule out consistently, keeping your feet on the ground, and realising you're not as good as you think you are, and you're not as bad as you think you are, because it's such an up and down career to be a part of. So, yeah, we're going to see it become more like football, I think. But from an agency perspective, I'm really...
So what do you mean by that, becoming more like football?
In terms of, I think there'll be more people seeing dollar signs when it comes to a player. Yeah. You'll see them as assets, and I think that's really dangerous from a young player's perspective. And you get someone promising you the world when actually it comes down to putting the work in, but also, yeah, just having really good people around you. I can't stress that enough. You see, Stokes is a great example. I mean, how much did he pay respect to Neil Fairbrother in his documentary? And having such a great person like Neil around him throughout those tough times, I mean, that's an extreme. But I think that's so important for each young player.
I'm going to pick you up on, you talked about fulfillment. Part of the prep that Kent give all the journalists when they come today is a list of all the teams that you've always played for. And there's a long list for both of you. And the kind of what for this winter, you guys have both had, like, when you've played franchise cricket, you've played pretty much a full competition. How I sometimes wonder, when you see players go to a league for 2 games, how fulfilling is that? And, like, do you really appreciate when you come back to Kent, you've got a full season ahead of you, that is something that's just more satisfying from a professional point of view?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think a lot of it depends on where you are in your career. You know, we all know the situation with Bilbo not going to the IPL, wants to play more cricket, potentially, you know, Test cricket as a carrot there as well. Someone like Jordan Cox, I think at the start of his career, I think it's amazing that he's going to these franchise leagues, not necessarily playing, but being around, what Sam said, being around great people, great players, some of the best players in the world, and learning off them. I think is a real positive for him at his stage of his career. And yeah, for someone like myself, I have to be careful how much I play now, because I've experienced burnout. I went to the IPL and sat on the bench for pretty much the whole competition, got given a game near the end. I was pretty much checked out. I had one foot on the plane and got a first baller from Ishant Sharma, and never been back since. But yeah, it is a tricky one, but I think it really depends on where you are in your career. And I'd certainly encourage younger players to go and hopefully be involved in these competitions, be around top players, learn off them. And I think as well, if you aren't playing and you're a young guy, it gives you that more hunger. Sort of when they come back to Kent, they're desperate to get out and start playing. And that's a positive for us. And like you say, as Sam says, as long as he's got good people around him, and he understands that, then I think it's great for him.
Someone like a Jordan Cox is a brilliant talent. We all know the talent he possesses in all 3 formats as well. And as Joe said, it's brilliant at this stage of his career to just lap the experiences up, whether you're playing or not. Actually, the value you get just from being around in the nets every single day, facing Rashid Khan in the nets. I mean, what a great experience that is. Okay, how am I going to play him when I play him in the summer at the 100? Or it's impossible not to fast forward your development. So I experienced that. I got to the stage where I just didn't. I was still around those environments, but wasn't getting that consistent game time, and so probably plateaued. So as long as that's not happening, as Joe said, at 27, 28, when you're coming into your peak years where you really want to just score a weight of runs, whatever the format, it's just whatever's right at that point in time in your career.
Focusing on the English summer now, I know Sam's answered this question, so I'll go to Joe first. Is there too much cricket in the English county season?
Go on, stand on the fence like I do.
No, I think, it's becoming it's becoming harder, should I say, for counties to put up competitive teams week in, week out. With the current schedule, I believe, there's a real overload, I think, especially for the bowlers. It's tough for a county like us who, what's our squad, 21, 22? And then you look at someone like a Surrey who could probably field 2 teams. There's a bit of a distance there in terms of being able to field a competitive team in every single game. We want to be competing for all the trophies, of course we do. But is that realistic with the current schedule and our current squad? No, I don't think so. So does that answer that?
It does. Sam, what do you think?
I think globally there's too much cricket, and too much cricket that doesn't have meaning. So we're seeing right now the bilateral series are kind of dwindling in terms of importance. We all know the reasons, obviously, with COVID and the backlog, of course, but there has to be a meeting where everyone just says, right, enough is enough, to sit down and work out from a franchise perspective as well as internationally, work out what's best for the game so we prolong that. And everyone benefits from a kind of streamlined schedule. And then that will filter obviously down into the domestic structure. I played in the Big Bash this year. When you've got their premier domestic competition and you don't have most of the Australian players even contracted to each of the franchises is mind-boggling to me. Even from a marketing perspective, like Steve Smith came in, smashed 100 at the end, and you saw the impact that had on the whole country. And also the competition, the credibility went through the roof. Steve loved it because he wanted to play T20 cricket, but everyone benefits from that. But there has to be that. We have it with the 100 as well. You've got to have your best players playing consistently in the 100, all of your international players. But streamlining it now, the America competition, you've got CPL cutting across. There has to be communication because it doesn't benefit the CPL, it doesn't benefit the USA cutting across our competitions, and likewise over the winter as well. So kind of talking not only about county cricket, but it's everything, is all encompassing right now.
Do you fancy a gig in administration when your playing career comes to an end?
We'll have to wait and see. Keezy I've always looked up to from a captaincy point of view, and you see the skills that he took from captaincy into the role he's doing now. I mean, he's doing incredibly well, and
you guys obviously know him really well. Did you think he'd do something like that when he called it a day from playing?
I'm not surprised how well he's going, but also the skill set he's got fits perfectly because he's a DOC and just sees things before it happens. So I'm not surprised how well he's gone, but I wouldn't have expected to see him in a suit. But he's doing brilliantly.
Yeah. And then just on, I guess, the year ahead, as Kent's got a really exciting squad. You mentioned Jordan Cox, but there are loads of really young players who are very exciting at the moment. As senior players, do you enjoy that responsibility to working with those players and kind of nurture them, I guess, through a summer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I was lucky enough when I first started. We had a fantastic squad. You've already touched on there. Rob Key was captain. Our coach, Matt Walker, was there. We had some fantastic South African players, Martin van Jaarsveld. And they were very good to me growing up. So naturally, I think there's an ownership there to take on that role and try and be an ear for listening for if they've got any problems or offering a bit of advice here and there. Of course, I think it's a duty of care that we have to try and share our experiences and try and help them along their journey as well.
Do you enjoy that aspect of the captaincy?
Yeah, a huge amount in terms of seeing people develop as men, but also as cricketers. You see the development people get rapidly, and Zach's a great example. Kind of when I took over the captaincy, you saw the potential to grow for him, and I see him as a future leader as well, whether it's here or England, and that's always been in the back of your mind, where you see someone and you think they've got real quality that just needs to be nurtured in the right direction. I'm not
So
saying
you're taking credit for Zach.
No, not at all. I'm just saying,
just Shaheen's promotion.
He's got the skills. He's got the skill set, but we're very lucky. Like Joe, as a senior player, is, in terms of his personality, the calming personality he has, is so key to have around the dressing room as senior players. As he alluded to, I was very lucky with the opportunities that Rob Key gave me as a player coming through, and having that senior player, whether it's Joe, myself, whoever it is, having that senior player who's going to hold you accountable and still push you, but you know that they have the best interests at heart, is invaluable. And that's what you see that's where you see development, is as long as you have those characters in the dressing room. And Joe is absolutely one of those guys that I not only lean on, but certainly a lot of other people do. So everyone gets so excited about youth and the exuberance of youth, and you need that. But you have to have that experience and the know-how in and around that to really complement and to produce a winning team.
Well, fascinating stuff. Thanks both for your time, and best of luck with the start of the season.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Joe, what's your moment of the week?
So mine came from the Women's Premier League Eliminator, and it was Mumbai Indians, Issy Wong taking the first hat-trick in the tournament. It's just a brilliant moment to watch live. First one, full bunger on leg stump, gets caught on the deep, got a bit lucky there. But after that, there was a pinpoint leg stump Yorker. And then the third one was our England teammate, Sophie Eccleston, castled. And then just kind of wild scenes of jubilation. And it's a special moment for a young cricketer who's moving along very quickly. She then took 3 more in the final, so 7 across the eliminator in the final, leading wicket taker among seamers in the tournament. So a brilliant tournament for a young player who's had a bit of opportunity with England, not loads, done pretty well, but didn't make the T20 World Cup squad most recently. So she's kind of moved up a level. But it did get me to thinking, I've mentioned it on the pod a couple of times, but back in 2020, we did the 19 most exciting teenagers in the UK, male and female. A 15-year-old Alice Capsey was in there, Lauren Bell was in there, and Issy Wong was another name who came up 17 at the time. I'd not heard of her name at the start of the piece, but I was asking around and her name kept cropping up. And I chatted to Paul Greetham, who's Warwickshire's elite cricket development manager. And it was clear he was really excited at the time. He recalled meeting Issy for the first time, aged, I think, 12, he said. And her telling him, I'm going to be the fastest female English bowler of all time. I interviewed her a year later. She told me exactly the same thing pretty much straight away as well. And that kind of sums her up. She's really bright, but she also understands, I think, a bit of self-promotion, and it does feel like she really embodies where the women's game is going now. And I remember speaking to Heather Knight a few years ago, and she talked about the sense of gratitude that players of her generation had in terms of the opportunities they were afforded, that group who got the first professional contracts in 2014, because they'd seen players like Charlotte Edwards, Claire Taylor, that generation and generations before that, how hard they'd had to work for every single opportunity, even paying for their own kit, paying for their own way. So there's that sense from Heather's lot, they were so grateful to actually have progressed from that point. Now with Issy Wong and her generation, I just there isn't that sense of gratitude, and nor should there be, because the women's game has absolutely proved its worth, quite literally, in the sense that, you know, it's a 95 million broadcast deal that they've done for the WPL, and now they're reaping the benefits and enjoying that stage and the platform to perform, and no one more than someone like Issy Wong, who is, you know, charismatic. She's a born performer, and now she's playing best against best in a lucrative tournament in front of busy stadiums, and this is kind of what she was born for, and it's great to see. Even that 3 years, so much has changed from speaking to her as just a kid coming through with these big dreams, and actually now they're all coming to fruition.
She clearly really enjoys the big moment as well.
That's
I mean,
it.
part of how amazing the hat trick ball was the noise of the crowd was incredible. Like, it's Mumbai Indians playing in Mumbai, full house, getting so behind this brand new team.
Also, firstly, she made the first 11 for that first game, which wasn't a stick on by any means. And do you remember what she did to her first ball? First ball in the
Hit it for
WPL?
6.
She did it for 6. Yeah. 6 from 1. That's quite a way to announce yourself. you used the word charismatic, Joe. She is devilishly charismatic and knows it. And she plays her cricket as an extension of that. There is a like tumbling amount of personality that's just coming out of her all the time when she plays. And that takes you a long way in the game. So much of cricket is about convincing the opponents that you fancy it more than they do, and that you back yourself a bit more than they do, and burying whatever self-doubts you've got in the moment, suppressing them and eliminating them. And she does that as naturally as any young cricketer around. And that's what gets her into that franchise in the first place. Obviously, Charlotte Edwards being the overseer helps. But then she suddenly ends up opening the bowling and batting 6 for Mumbai Indians women's team. And as you say, Joe, 2 or 3 years ago, she was talking to us and was just this sort of sprightly voice, that was very good, as you say, at self-promotion. And now she's right in the vanguard of it, bending cricket matches to her will. Now, if you look at the 7 wickets she took in isolation across the semi and the final, as Mumbai won the thing.
4 full tosses,
Well, 2 full tosses in the final in the first over, having gone for 10 from 2 from her first 2 deliveries. Verma took her apart. But then she just has this innate ability. It's what both of them used to have, that you drag one down and that'd be the most dangerous ball you're going to bowl. And she has that in her because there's so much going on around her. She's one of these box office cricketers, and if the WPL, I keep wanting to call it the IPL, the WPL has paraded one big obvious point. Again, it's just how box office and how watchable so many of these female cricketers are now.
I think for both Wong and Capsey, it almost feels like they've been let loose in the tournament in a way that they haven't really for England yet. And I think it's partly to do with how much quality there is around them and their teams, whereas they almost have to fulfill roles that senior players fulfill when they're playing for England. There isn't like a standout, the bowling attack that Wong's part of is excellent, full of superstars around her, which she doesn't quite have for England. She's got established internationals, but not global superstars who demand a spot in these teams. And same with Capsey, that she's in a batting lineup that is so good. She can, I guess, play in her more natural way. Going on to the final, Mumbai Indians won it. Nat Sciver-Brunt hit 60 not out in the final. Hayley Matthews took 3 for 5 from her 4 overs of the ball. She had an exceptional tournament after a comparatively quiet couple of years in international cricket. And I think she fits a similar bill to Capsey and Wong in terms of being around better players has brought more out of her.
Massively. I mean, particularly for Matthews, that's not a good West Indies side that she's part of now. Obviously, they've had some success previously, but not now. And yeah, she just looks like she's been massively freed up, and especially as a batter, she often plays quite sedately for West Indies, but Mumbai Indians, she can come out and just hit it because she's got so much more support around her.
I think just purely aesthetically, her and Harman-Preet, and I guess Mandana as well, as a sort of wistful old lefty style, but Harman-Preet and Matthews to me are the most watchable of this current crop. Matthews in particular, I mean, obviously she played brilliantly in that T20 tournament that West Indies won. But since then, I haven't paid that much attention to her because she had gone off the boil, and there's clearly there's a vibe issue around the West Indies women's team. But seeing her, crack on, open up for Mumbai in the last few weeks, she's stunning to watch.
And we talk about Wong having a pretty good eliminator and final. Nat Sciver-Brunt also had a pretty good eliminator and final. She hit 72 not out in the eliminator and 60 not out in the final, continuing her particularly excellent record in the really big games. Joe, you spoke to her dad for the upcoming magazine.
I spoke to her and her dad, yeah. This is for the series I've been doing called Procreation, all about how the best cricketers have become the best cricketers, basically. And I chatted to her dad, Richard, who was heading out to Mumbai a few days after we talked to go and watch his daughter, and I saw him in the footage jumping up and down with a Mumbai Indian shirt on, obviously enjoying it. And it was a really interesting. I mean, she's had a very unusual route to get to where she is. I mean, literally geographically, she's had a very odd route, in that she was born in Tokyo and then spent time in Poland and Holland, and didn't really discover cricket until quite late. She played a lot of other sports. She was a good tennis player, really good football player who was on the development books at Chelsea. So there was no, when I was, the last one I did was Joe Root, for instance. It's pretty clear from a very young age that he was going to be a cricketer. That wasn't true of of that until she was probably 16, 17, just because she had so many other options. And yeah, I really like doing these pieces. I like speaking to the parents of players. It's always interesting. And Richard, I think Nat described him as her biggest fan and also perhaps her harshest critic, apart from herself, in that he sounds quite demanding. He's not afraid to put in the family WhatsApp group that she shouldn't have played that shot at that particular time, which she said her brother and sister usually back her up and say, "Come on, Dad, leave it." And then I thought, Nat, she's great to talk to, very sort of understated, but very funny. And I said to Dad the other day, like, all the things he's telling me, then they don't match up with the John Lewis ethos. Like he obviously is. The dad is saying, kind of get your head down, and John Lewis is saying, you got to go out and play your shots. And she's like, so I'm now like, do I get John to try and convince my dads? how do we actually kind of take this forward? Because they're not on the same page at the moment. All said with a smile. And she's just in stunning form at the moment. And like you said, she had a little blip mid-tournament when actually there wasn't much to play for because Mumbai Indians were already through. And then when it really mattered, she steps up again as she generally does for England. Her World Cup record is brilliant for England. And if she had a bit more support around her, she'd have a second World Cup winners medal to go with the first from 2017.
She's the best player in the world, best all-round female cricketer in the world now, I think. With the numbers and the big moments now to back it up. Now, this final that we've just seen and the semi that leads into it, this is even more than any of the men's IPL finals. This epitomises the era of women's cricket. This encapsulates where the women's cricket's got to, I think. And you just run along those 11s. They are star-studded. There's not 3 or 4 good players, maybe in their early to mid 30s, and 7 Indian cricketers. This is just like a series of world 11s. And she, come the crunch, just as you saw in an England shirt, she's head and shoulders above the rest. And I think what's happened to her, Heather Knight said something to me a couple of years ago about her, and she said the thing with Natalie Sciver, as she was then, is that she's so good, but she doesn't realise why. And you've interviewed her, right? A couple of times. And she does have this sort of slight, very nice way about her, but it's slightly diffident, slightly standoffish, a little bit bemused by her own brilliance almost, and slightly conscious of parading it or declaring her brilliance. And I think you've sometimes seen that from her in her career. And that line from Heather sort of alludes to that, I think. And when I've interviewed her before, I mean, she gave me a great line a couple of years ago when I've got it written down here. Hold on. I asked her, is she like ambling towards becoming the best cricketer on the planet? And she said, well, I think I could be, and I'd like to be, but I'm not there yet. And it's a very Nat Sciver-like line. It's sort of full of focus, but also slightly relaxed. And well, if it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. And I think she's been like that. She's also been bored of T20 cricket. And she said this to me herself when I interviewed her last year. And the one-track nature of it, she said she hadn't got her right rhythm yet in T20 cricket. And I think a lot of it, it's just a little bit beneath her. Going out and clearing your front leg for another domestic game or 100 game when you're that good, I think it's just a little bit underwhelming for her. But when you have to go and play and the world's watching you and you're creating a completely new overlaid narrative about women's cricket, and that game yesterday is as big as it's ever been, the biggest, obviously, domestic game you've ever seen in women's cricket. But it's opening up a whole new world for them. It doesn't surprise me that with that extra motivation, that extra clarity, that she becomes the key player in those two games. It doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, she said to me in the interview I just did that she's enjoying her cricket more than she ever has done, and which is great to hear, because it was only last September that she took a break from the game through kind of to mentally refresh, and said it would all become a bit much. And she talked about that being very much a product of the end of the bubble period that had really kind of drained her, and talking to a team psychologist. And again, it's one of those, often cricket throws us up incredibly simple messages that sound quite obvious, but basically just to go out there and enjoy it and be less kind of results focused, again, very much like the kind of Stokes McCullum stuff that we're hearing now, just to go out and kind of enjoy it and play with freedom. And that, she said, it's timed really nicely with the way that John Lewis wants this England side to play. And I think she just carried that on in this tournament and is feeling less burdened by it. And as a result, is enjoying it a lot more and playing her very best cricket.
Just now the tournament's finished, how do you reflect on it, Phil? Comparing it to what the top franchise cricket is in the men's game compared to top international men's cricket, it just feels like a bigger deal. It's in men's cricket, you've got this history of enormous turnouts to games between the best teams in the world. In women's cricket, you haven't had that as much. You had the World Cup final at the MCG. You have the business ends of World Cups where you get loads of people in, but you don't regularly get atmospheres like you get not just in the women's IPL final. It was throughout the whole competition. The atmosphere is brilliant.
Yeah.
Is it possible that the women's game goes quite differently to the men's game in terms of how valued top franchise cricket becomes in comparison to international cricket?
I think absolutely. I think the stuff that I've watched in the last 2.5-3 weeks is the most consistently quality, watchable female cricket that I've ever seen. Any discussion of international women's cricket, obviously you have to put Australia in their own category, and then the next 2.5 to 3 teams in the next category, and then the rest in the next category. What you're seeing here, notwithstanding some underperformances such as RCB, who have a star-studded lineup and didn't click at all, but will do eventually. What you just saw week after week was quality, watchable quality in and of itself. Not symbolic, not great that it's happening and it might grow to something, just quality sport in the here and now. I want to bring something up, so just pause with me. Andrew Miller, brilliant Cricinfo columnist, stalwart, and writes, of course, for WCM. He wrote on the WPL impact for the upcoming magazine, and I just want to grab a line out for you. When you look at Mumbai Indians versus UP Warriors, and you see Matthews, Sciver-Brunt and Harman lining up against Lisa Healy, Deepti Sharma and Sophie Eccleston, it's possible to pierce the preconceptions that the men's internationally weighted heritage has forced upon us and recognise that a league-based future could actually be the optimum vehicle for global growth for the women's game. And I see that, and almost conversely or surprisingly, but they're almost now running with this idea and overtaking the men, because the landscape is not quite as garbled and not quite as compromised as the men's landscape is. The future is less blemished, I think, for the female game, and I don't think there'll be as much conflict. I don't think there'll be as much tension between your international board, your home board, and your franchise cricket, and so on and so on. I think it can coexist more naturally than it can in the men's game. And I think ultimately, as a punter, as a fan, I'm going to want to watch that stuff just as much as I'm going to want to watch the international stuff and whisper it. I might even want to watch it a little bit more here and there. And I'm less conflicted saying that about the female game than I am about the male game.
And Andrew goes on in that column to talk about international women's cricket perhaps being more reflecting a bit more like international football, where the big events, the World Cups, the Euros are big events because that's when suddenly attention turns onto them. Whereas, the equivalent of a bilateral series, I guess, would be, the qualifying in football, which no one really cares about and is a bit of a kind of just has to happen. It's just a means to an end. And I can see that. And then he talked about as well that these tournaments, if more crop up, can actually end up benefiting the international game because you have more players from different countries playing in there. We haven't got to that point yet. This tournament is still very much dominated by Australians, English players, obviously the local Indian players. There are a few examples, and hopefully you'll get more and more of those. But that's what sort of remains to be seen, whether tournaments like this just mean the countries that have the most end up having more quality, or whether actually there is some sort of equity found.
That's a good point. Elsewhere, there was a ridiculous T20I between South Africa and West Indies the day at Centurion. So 517 runs were scored across the game, which is an all-time record in T20 cricket, beating the carnage that we saw in Rawalpindi a few weeks ago. West Indies hit 258 off 20 overs.
And lost comfortably.
Comfortably lost.
So I went out at half time. So I watched the Johnson Charles.
Yeah.
I watched the second half of it when I realised what was happening.
118 off 46.
Yeah.
And he lost.
He lost. Not even close. So yeah, I didn't even look at the result until I got in late that night. And yeah, they got stuffed.
Although West Indies bowled, 10 wides and a couple of no balls? So they basically gave them two whole extra
Yeah.
overs.
I mean, Rabada was the only bowler across the two sides to go at less than 10s.
Mangala went for something like 50 and 18 balls.
Cottrell went for 29 off 1 over.
Did he?
Yeah, De Kock hit 100 off.
Was that the first over of the innings?
I think it might be number.
Maybe the second.
Can't remember if it was 1 or 2. But De Kock hit 100 off 44. Reza Hendricks 68 off 28. It was only 2 months ago he couldn't hit it off the square. Hendricks, and he's going at about 250 there. There's a really good piece on Cricinfo by Firdaus Munda. She spoke to a few of the players involved in the game about why it was so high scoring. So she wrote that Rabada, as he walked off the field, said that West Indies were 10 runs short.
Isn't that the famous South Africa Australia ODI?
Yeah, but
was it Callis who said the same?
So Callis supposedly said it, but I don't think anyone's 100% sure if he did say it or not.
Right.
Or is it this
time?
Did he say
they're 20 short or
something?
Rabada
says they're short. And Johnson Charles said it was just a combination of a really, really good pitch, short boundaries. They're obviously on the high veld, so the air's a bit thinner, which apparently makes a difference. And Charles said that.
Well, it does make a difference.
Well, I'm sure it does, but I don't understand why. I couldn't really tell you why.
Yeah, it's thinner. So
yeah, I know that's the line, but I don't really understand how that works. But anyway,
it's pretty straightforward.
I don't think he's a skeptic necessarily.
I'm not a thin air skeptic. I believe that it exists, but I can't tell you exactly why it exists.
That's like the whole of the world to me. But that's
science with Yas and Phil.
Anyway, he also said that you can just play proper shots when the boundaries are that small and the pitch is that good. So you basically players have more shots at their disposal in conditions like that. But it's interesting that we're seeing that record getting broken more and more regularly now. Who'd want to be a bowler, eh?
It's been quite a good ding-dong few weeks between
really
the two teams.
Really
West Indies have come up short in pretty much every game. I think that they won one ODI, I think. But they've competed in all the games. They don't have enough batting yet in the test matches to compete against good bowling sides, but they're hanging in there. And there's a sort of chrysalis of a team emerging there, I think, with the West Indies. I think they've actually conducted themselves pretty well out there.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from people who cover and watch West Indies cricket more closely than we do. But it's quite interesting. We were looking at kind of which countries have been giving opportunities to younger players in the world recently. West Indies basically don't have anyone, but other than Jaden Seals, who's obviously really good but injured at the moment, there are very, very few young West Indians playing international cricket. So these are guys aged 23 or below. Dominic Drake's played maybe one game in the last 2 years at that age, but it's very, very few of them are doing that. Some of these guys who are coming in, we talked about Brandon King on last week. He's not young.
28
He's not young.
And when we were doing the next Fab Four, and we a few years ago in the magazine. Actually, it wasn't a few years; it was a few months, wasn't it? Hard to keep track. And then we picked out the next big batting thing from each country, and it was really hard to find one for West Indies because we were focusing on red ball here. And I remember speaking to the guys at the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, and they gave a few suggestions, but none of them had any kind of record to speak of. It was all based on potential. I think we might have gone with. I think we went with Hetmeyer in the end, which was a bit of a cop-out because he doesn't really play red ball cricket. But we were like, if he decides to give it a go and takes it seriously, then maybe. Not that that's looking particularly promising these days, but given his relationship with the West Indies.
Doesn't play for him at all.
No.
Elsewhere, it won't come as a huge surprise, but the poor rating given to the Indore pitch used for the third India-Australia test match has been upgraded to just below average.
Why won't it come as a huge surprise, yes?
Well, because same thing happened to the Rawalpindi pitch that was also given a poor rating recently. So I guess the ICC are easily swayed when there's pressure applied in these situations. It basically means that the venue is significantly less likely to incur a 12-month ban. If you get a poor rating, you get 3 demerit points. If you get 5 in a 5-year period, that's it for a year. Where it's below average, only 1 point.
I reckon the allotment at the end of my granddad's garden would probably still just get an adequate. if someone from the BCCI lent on them, my word. If that is a bare, that's just an adequate pitch, then what has to be a poor one, really?
So they said
What's the line? What's the explanation?
they said that basically for it to be poor, it needs to have even more inconsistent bounce from the start, which I think is ridiculous because it was shooting low on day one,
Yeah.
even first session. That's not good. Anyway, to celebrate World Whiskey Day on Monday, the Wisden shop is offering 30% off their limited edition spirits range, including the Wisden whiskey, gin, and vodka. Use the code SPIRITS30 to claim your discount before the offer ends. We'll leave that in the description.
Wait.
And the whiskey is really good. And I'm not even contractually obliged to say that. It is just really good.
Wait. I'm going to bring up my Joe Root
Yes.
testimonial. I had a glass over New Year and was very impressed, says Joe, on the 6th of January 2021.
Wonderful.
There you go. So
Wonderful.
from the man himself, go and get a bottle of the rye.
Joe, there's a new magazine out this week. It's the Big County Preview. There's 26 pages in the middle devoted to the county season. What else is in it? We'll talk about the county championship in more detail on next week's pod.
We've got some good exclusive interviews. There's the Ollie Robinson, which I believe you've already talked about in some detail.
In some detail, yeah.
No, I haven't heard it.
It's just the gardener went after me again last
did he?
week. Yeah.
I didn't realise.
You were going on about for ages after he was talking about Darren Bravo
Yeah.
and his in-swingers.
But then ended up talking about
Give the people what they want.
Yeah.
Darren Bravo and his in-swingers. So we won't talk about Robinson.
No.
Really good interview with Graham Smith by Mel Farrell. This is Graham Smith, who is commissioner of the SA20 now. So he's in a very interesting position where he is at the helm of this new franchise tournament, whilst also on the MCC World Cricket Committee, trying to work out how Test cricket has a future in this landscape. And he's kind of, I guess, pivoting and trying to work out how it all fits together. And it's no easy task. But he's particularly fascinating on where South African cricket is right now. And he says it was kind of on its knees at the start of their summer. Obviously, absolutely thrashed by Australia. But, and people would say he would say this because he's in charge of the SA20, but he talks about the kind of the good vibes going back through South African cricket, that the tournament was really successful in its first year, that the national team looks in better shape, obviously convincing wins over the West Indies, ODI World Cup qualification looking in better shape, and also just the fact that South African cricket, they're talking about the cricket for a while rather than admin, balls ups and all the rest of it that comes with South African cricket. He also told us, which I don't know, I haven't seen this elsewhere, I don't know if this is an exclusive as such, but he told Mel that they're very much looking at doing an SA20 women's tournament next year. The T20 World Cup, Women's World Cup in South Africa was hugely successful, sold out Newlands for the final, which obviously South Africa are part of. Real good vibes there that they want to kind of pick up on and run with. So it was a kind of combination of feeling kind of optimistic about the state of South African cricket, but still with that inevitable slight tinge of gloominess that comes with how does this all look for Test cricket in the future from a guy who has captained more Test matches, won more Test matches, scored quite a lot of Test match runs, really cares about this thing, but still doesn't quite know, like the rest of us, how the future looks with all these competing other tournaments.
It's quite interesting that with him and Key, who was in the last magazine, you're two people who you'd like to hope that if anyone in the world has a decent idea and a chance of getting people together to sort something out around Test cricket, those would be two of the people involved. But they've both kind of said that I'm not 100% sure.
Well, they both said quite similar things. We need to get everyone in a room and have a conversation and a dialogue, but it's
Maybe
still not
we
quite
need to
clear
do it.
what that conversation
Maybe we need to do it.
Yeah.
Get 10 big names from the game, all get them to think it's a one-to-one interview, and then turns up there's all of them there.
So I wrote this kind of inspired by the Smith thing and the main editorial that we got all these big voices talking tough, getting in rooms, round tables and bashing tables and thrashing things out. But there's like this vagueness to the language because nobody really has the answer yet. Just a nod, though, to the World Cricket Committee MCC statement of a couple of weeks ago, and I think Smith is on that, but certainly he is, yeah. It's Ganguly, Sangakkara, et al. The if you like, the new conscience of the game. the recently retired new voices, and they absolutely recognise that the game is reaching a tipping point and intervention is essential. So at least there is a sort of collective acknowledgement now, and every interview that the likes of Smith does is echoing this point. So I guess the first part is to acknowledge that this is a deep and sort of existential problem. And then the second part is trying to find someone with the brain power and maybe the courage to actually begin to plan our way through it. Not everyone is ever going to be happy at the end of this. There's going to be a lot of compromises needed, but it cannot go on as it is. It cannot just be sort of splurged across, this confused, saturated landscape.
And for a bit of levity, we've got a kind of brilliantly bonkers interview with Danny Morrison, which is probably everything that you'd expect if you've followed his commentary. And on a more serious note, Phil and his test ticket prices, which has been going on for a few months now. I think it's probably fair to say Phil's happy that one's done.
Yeah.
It was important that we did it. So it was looking at test match prices for tickets in this country. You might remember we canvassed opinion from a lot of our readers and listeners, got a huge response from people. And I think it's obviously a tricky one to navigate, but I think Phil probably gave the test match venues every opportunity to defend their prices. Some did it relatively convincingly to a point. Some didn't even engage with the conversation, which perhaps tells you a bit about whether they thought they could justify it or not. But definitely worth a read. And I think, Ashes has pushed it all up and pushed it even more into the forefront of people's minds, because a lot of people have messaged us saying they've been going to a test match every summer for however long, and this summer it's just too much and they're not going to do it. And that's really sad that we've got to that point. And hopefully that some of the test match venues might sit up and take notice and do what they can. But they also make the point that everything's more expensive and the prices have to reflect that. Now people can judge for themselves if they think that the prices are a fair reflection of the situation we find ourselves in.
I mean, we've been doing. We asked for listener and readers to get in touch a lot, but there's never been a reaction like this. I think nothing's really come close to this.
Well, even the 100, and we got a lot on the 100, and people, as we know, care a lot about the 100. But this was another level, yeah.
Have you read it?
No, I've not read this one. No.
Yeah. I'd leave that one to the end. Oh, you. Yeah. My favourite bit, but then I would say this, is the interview on the back page with Dan Lawrence that Jim pulled together. Did I mention this last week? I don't know. I'm mentioning it anyway. Jim pulled it together with a matter of minutes to go before we went to print, and it's that nice back page where you have the something that changed my life, and the first one we did was Jack Russell, the sketch that changed his life. Then we did the run out that changed Gary Pratt's life, etc., etc. Well, this was the ground that changed Dan Lawrence's life. He grew up in a flat with his old man, with his family, literally on the ground of Chingford CC in northeast London. And he just tells the story of those formative years growing up there. And there's something very, very beautiful about the way that he tells it. And it's obviously an unusual way into the game.
He said he wouldn't have found it, very unlikely to have found cricket if it wasn't for that location, because it wasn't part of his school. Went to a state school that didn't play any cricket.
Yeah. And he almost had so much access to the game. So they have some indoor nets at Chingford. He had so much access to it that in order to keep it interesting for him as a young lad, he invented new ways of playing, new shots to play. And obviously you see that with him now. And that's it's an extension of his curiosity, I think, as a cricketer. He's a very watchable cricketer in part because he does it his own way. And he does it his own way in part because he had limitless access to the game, So yeah, that's a lovely little bit, actually. And there's lots of other tidy stuff within there.
I'll point out as well, so Mark Ramprakash, who we had as a columnist last season, he had a winter in hibernation. He's back on for the new season, addressing the issue of dressing room culture based on his own experiences as a player and as a coach, and obviously tying it in with what we've heard from the Yorkshire racism hearing over the last few weeks as well. And he's got some kind of pretty depressing stories from his own playing days. He's quite honest about it all. And then we talk about, the importance of a happy, positive dressing room in terms of the impact that has on performance, and we're seeing that now, obviously, with the Ben Stokes, Brendan McCullum. I think he's always an interesting read, Ramps. So yeah, I'd recommend having a look at that one too.
The county championship preview is excellent. It's, as I said, 26 pages long. You've got 10 burning questions ahead of the new campaign, and then the regular county files bit with previews and all that.
You did your Dan Mosley shuffle or Mousley shuffle?
Yeah, it's difficult. So we had.
You're always going on about him.
I don't think I am.
Yeah, you are.
I don't think I am, but it's always difficult when you have like a one to watch, because I feel like it's cheating picking someone who a young player who did well towards the end of last season. That makes sense. I kind of wanted to pick someone who hasn't actually played that much yet. If that makes sense, and you could get those horribly wrong. So you went for Emilio Gay, which I guess less controversial.
And then went down injured.
And then went down injured.
Oh, really?
Just after we got a print, yeah.
Oh dear.
Gonna have an operation. It's probably not going to play.
Oh dear. I enjoyed, as ever, the coaching section. Alex Tudor with some excellent advice on, I guess, the physicality of being a fast bowler, how to train physically, but also what to do if you're shit scared of the ball.
Indeed. And on that, another shout out, please, anybody out there beginning their nets or right in the guts of the nets, ready for pre-season, please do write in, whether you're a batter, bowler, keeper, whatever, and we will get your questions onto one of our star-studied panel.
Have we read out that nice email yet from the guy who had the... I'll read it out anyway.
Yeah.
So this was a guy who emailed in with a question which we put to Wally Pope he's quite a small guy and was struggling to get pace on the ball against spin. We put that to Wally Pope, who answered it in the magazine. And Andy Stone replied with, "Many thanks for printing my email and for the excellent advice from Ollie Pope in particular. What an honour to be coached, albeit remotely, by such a talented player. If I suddenly start making centuries this year, I'll let you know." So you could be Andy Stone. You could be getting your advice from Anya Shrubsole, Liam Plunkett. We've just signed up for our coaching team as well. Keaton Jennings, Mark Ramprakash, Toby Radford, Matt Parkinson, Lydia Greenway. So yeah, any query, get them in.
And as ever, you can email in. You can describe what your problem is. You can send in a video of what your issue might be to editorial@wisden.com. The 100 draft took place towards the end of last week.
Did it?
Yeah, it did. And we will be talking about it as part of our overall domestic season preview on next week's podcast. That is all for today's show. Cheers, Phil. Cheers, Joe. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. We'll be back at the start of next week.